see him around. Good morning, church. How are we doing this morning? Good. So we are in the second part of our series, Beginnings, our Christmas series. And we're looking into this series what the gospel, the four gospels have to say about who Jesus is. This year we've been looking into how to be rooted. We're looking into discipleship. How do we grow to be more like Jesus? How do we walk with Jesus and become more like him? So we're looking into the gospels, looking at the Christmas stories to see who Jesus is. What does each gospel has to say about Jesus? And this morning we're going to focus in the book of Mark. But before we go to Mark, I'd love to give us an overview of the four Gospels. It will be briefly. It's not like a school lesson. But just to help us understand a bit of each Gospel, who wrote it, why did they write it. So it also helps us understand how they told us the Christmas story, or if they have not told it and why they didn't. So if we have a look, we've got a beautiful screen that will appear the next few weeks probably. So the first gospel is Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector, so people didn't really like him because he used to work for the Roman Empire. He was one of the Jesus disciples. Jesus recruited him, and he saw the events firsthand. So Matthew he wrote about things he saw. He wrote to the Jews. Matthew wanted to write to the community that was waiting for the Messiah. And he wrote it to show that Jesus was the Messiah who would fulfill the Old Testament. So there was many prophecies that a Messiah would come to save Israel, to save the Jews. And Matthew wrote it, the way he writes it, the things he described, is to help the Jews understand Jesus is the Messiah and he will sort everything out. Everything that was promised, everything that was left broken from before, he will sort it. So then we have I'll skip Mark because Mark is the one we're talking today, so I have a bit more to talk about it. So I'll move to Luke. Luke was an educated doctor, and he was the only one who was a non-Jewish author. He wrote it for all humanity. Luke, as you see, if you read, it's one of the biggest gospels, one of the longest ones. He gives a lot of details. And the feeling I have, Luke, as a doctor, is like if we find the cure for cancer, Luke wanted to make sure he shared it for all humanity. He said, this cannot be restrained just for the Jews. This is a message for all people. So Luke writes it with many details to show that Jesus is the Savior to all people, not just the Jews. Then we have John, and particularly John's my favorite gospel. John is one of the closest disciples to Jesus, one of Jesus' friends. Do you know when it says that he laid his head on Jesus' chest? That's John that wrote that gospel. He wrote it for Jews and non-Jews. And the beauty of John is he wanted people to believe that Jesus was the Messiah and the Son of God. But John does it in such a clever way because he's writing for Jews and non-Jews. So he writes in a way, when you read the gospel, he puts so many of the Jew traditions there that helps the non-Jews to understand the context. But he also writes it in a way that he helps Jews understand that Jesus is the Messiah. So he brings a bit of that connection to non-Jews with Jews. And then the one we're going to look into today, it's Mark. Mark is called actually John Mark. John is his name in Jew. John was a very common name for the Jewish people. And Mark was a very common name for the Roman Empire. So Mark writes it to all people. And he writes it for the Romans. He writes it for the Gentiles. He's writing it to the people that have not experienced Jesus, who might not even be waiting for Jesus, for people that were not expecting a Messiah. But he writes a message to say, you still need to be saved. And the thing about Mark is, have you ever talked to someone when you try to run? It doesn't work, right? Because you get tired and you're talking and you get tired. Even sometimes if I go for a walk with my husband, I need to say, slow down. My legs are not as long as yours. And I'm trying to talk and it feels like you're losing your breath. If you read the Gospel of Mark, that's the impression that gives to you. Mark has a fast pace. He's writing it quick. He's not missing the point. Mark, for me, is one of the authors that when you look at his gospel, have you ever talked to someone who is extremely direct? When they have to say something, they go straight to the point. They're not like, but no, this is the problem. This is how we're going to solve it. This is the answer here. Mark is that kind of person. He goes straight into the point. He's not missing words. Because Mark has an urgency to share the gospel with the non-Jews, with the Romans. The book of Mark is believed to be the first gospel to be written. You see, Mark was not losing time. He was not missing time. He wanted to write to get the message. He heard it from Peter, because we see that Mark was not one of the disciples, but he was one of Peter's interpreters and one of his closest friends. So all he heard from Peter, I guess it's like, I have not seen this. I heard all these things about Jesus. I need to share it quick. So I don't have time to go through every single detail. I need to write the message, the main point to get to other people. And that's what Mark does. So you see, we're going to focus on Mark today. And if you read the first chapter of Mark, it's like, read it and your breath is taken away. Because in the first chapter, he covers a lot. He covers Jesus coming, getting baptized, but then Jesus started his missions, and at the end of the first chapter of Mark, Jesus has done at least 3 miracles. Do you see how fast he goes? But the interesting thing is, Mark doesn't tell us the Christmas story. You know, while Matthew and Luke gives you the scene, tells you about the shepherds, about the stable, about all those little details, John goes a bit further, and he started talking about Jesus. He was there from the beginning, referring to Genesis, that's showing that Jesus was God once the world was created. Mark doesn't go into any of that. And you might be asking, how are we going to learn or talk about Christmas in a book that doesn't tell us the Christmas story? It feels like Christmas we think the babe in the manger and all that picture. And it's kind of like if Mark was in charge of Christmas decoration, he would have removed the nativity. You see that? The magic happened. My hand removed it from the screen. So Mark doesn't give us any details, because Mark had the urgency to share what Jesus had done. In Mark, Jesus walked in on stage as a grown-up man. He walks in on stage getting baptized. For Mark, it didn't matter where Jesus came from. For Mark and for the Romans, they were not expecting the Messiah, so they didn't need all the genealogy of Jesus. They didn't need to know where he came from, who were his parents, how it took him all way back to King David, whatever. They didn't care about it. And Mark had the urgency to share, this is Jesus, this is what he does. He is the Son of God, and as the Son of God, he's the only one capable of saving us. And that's what he does in his gospel. Mark's beginning is about purpose. You see, it starts in Mark 1:1. The beginning of the good news or the gospel about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. Interesting, Mark doesn't say, this is the beginning of Jesus' life. He says, this is the beginning of the good news. This is the beginning of the gospel. Because for Mark, the beginning wasn't about the moment. It wasn't for him, his book and everything wasn't about the moment that Jesus walked into humanity as a baby. It wasn't about that sentiment that brings to us, but it was about Jesus' purpose and mission. He starts with Jesus getting baptized. And the beautiful thing is, Mark doesn't give us the nativity story, but he brings it all when he talks about he incarnated. He came as flesh. He came as a human being. Heavens will open when Jesus gets baptized. This is all in the first about 10 verses of Mark. He is a very, very good summarizer guy. And he says even, he confirms that Jesus is the Son of God. He came from God and he's the Son of God. He says he heard a voice saying, "You are my Son in whom I'm well pleased." So Mark doesn't give us the nativity, but he gives us details that prove that Jesus is the Son of God. At Christmas, it's so easy to step into the sentiment of it, into the beautiful decorations, into the presents, into, the music. Yesterday, we put our Christmas up at home because we are not November people. But you even feel like, just putting Christmas decorations up is not enough. To get into the Christmas spirit, that's the word we usually use, let's put some music on. Mark was like, that is not what Jesus is about. It's not about the sentiment. It's about the mission. Mark tells us he pushes deeper. Don't celebrate just the moment that Jesus was born. It's step into his mission. It's step into what he's up to. It's step in what God is doing. You see, Christmas is not just a season to celebrate what happened. It's a season for us to remember why it happened. Why it happened. And how can we step into God's story? Christmas is not just another cute, beautiful story of a baby that had to be born and put into a manger because there was no place for him, there was no hotel for him. There's all beauty in that. That reveals a lot of God, who God is. But Christmas is a time for us to remember, why did that baby was born? Why did he came? You see, Christmas is God is stepping into our brokenness. Mark shows us in his first chapter, Jesus touching the sick, Jesus forgiving sins, Jesus welcoming the one rejected, Jesus breaking chains. You see, Christmas, the baby in the manger, this is what the manger was leading to. Jesus, the Son of God, God with us, God for us, and God saving us. This is what the manger leads to. The manger is the reflection of the cross. If we stop and just look at the baby in the manger, and through that we don't see the cross, Christmas is just another beautiful story. The manger reflects. The baby in the manger needs to reflect and show the Jesus on the cross. So when we look at Christmas right now, when we remember the baby in the manger, when we celebrate the God who became flesh as a baby and came for us, if that picture of that cute baby in the manger doesn't reflect to you the God who died for me and you on the cross, Christmas nearly becomes pointless. It's just another celebration. If Jesus stayed in a manger, we would have a cute story. If he lived a good life, we would have had a wise person that we could learn from. If he died and he stayed dead, it would just be another sad story of a good person who was killed by not being guilty of it. But you see, Jesus, the baby on the manger, is the same grown-up man who died for us on the cross. So let's remember that. Jesus does that so many times. If you read the book of Mark, in Mark at least 5 times, Jesus says, the Son of Man, the Son of God must suffer, be killed, and after 3 days, rise again. Jesus had a mission when he came as a baby, and it wasn't to stay there. He had a mission to save us. Christmas is good news because of what happened on Easter. Christmas is good news because of Easter. You see, so am I saying that the Christmas story doesn't matter? No. Christmas matter. Celebrating what God did on Christmas Day, whatever date it was actually, it matters. It matters because the manger leads to the cross. And because the cross leads to an empty tomb. And because an empty tomb leads to a new beginning for you and for me. You see, that's what the manger leads to. Jesus doesn't stay as a baby in the manger. It leads to our salvation. It leads to our freedom. It leads to me and you being able to have a new beginning every day. Because His grace renews on us every day. You see, it's like Christmas is the doorway that God walks through to become a human being. And Easter is the destination. He walks into humanity as a baby. That's the doorway. But it doesn't finish there. Easter was His destination. Easter was His mission. Dying on the cross was His mission on earth. And I was thinking, how do we understand it in a very easy way and bring in Christmas? I'm someone who loves wrapping presents, and I like to do it very well. I don't, sometimes like, my husband wraps it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, well, who wrote, is it Grace who did it, or is it you? So I'm very delicate. I'm the one who likes to put the bow on it, and this year we do a Brazil Christmas meal, me and some of the Brazilians, and Chris brought us some presents that I didn't even want to open it. Did you see the beautiful drawing at the entrance of church? She did it for all of us. And you look like you did it by hand. How dare am I, wrap this, tear apart this beautiful drawing. I opened it carefully so we could keep the drawing. So Christmas is like God wrapping the present. It's beautiful. God is so delicate, and He's so intentional with every single detail of the Christmas story. But Easter is like when you open the present. Because it's when it's open that the present actually does what it's meant to do. It's when it's open that it changes your life. Easter, Christmas is the doorway, but it's in Easter that our lives are changed. It's what He does on the cross that changes our lives. But Christmas matters. I love that Mark doesn't tell us the story about Christmas. And you see his urgency in communicating the message of who God was, who Jesus was, and what He came to do. And when you read the next books, like you read Acts, that is the birth of the church, and you read Paul's letters, if you read the book of Acts, in none of the preachers, the same as in Acts, they mention Jesus' birth. They go straight to the point, which is the cross. Paul, in all his letters, the person who wrote the most books in the Bible, he mentions it once in Galatians. But his point in there was to prove that Jesus came incarnated as a man, so that He wasn't just God. He was God and a person. And Christmas matter. And I love what Paul says in Philippians 2:5-7. And this is why it matters. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to His own advantage. Rather, He made Himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Christmas reveals a God who chose humility. It reveals a God who didn't demand a big entrance. It reveals a God who comes as one of us, fragile, dependent, vulnerable. A God who cried and needed to be comforted. A God who was hungry and needed to be fed. A God who had his nappy changed, and all that done by a simple teenage girl. Christmas matters because it reveals to us the type of God we choose to serve and love. A humble God who, like Paul says, being a very nature God, that was his nature, did not consider equality with God something to be used in his advantage. He made himself nothing, being made in human likeness. You see, Christmas matters because it shows Jesus as human, who went through the same emotions that we go, who went through challenge like we do, who was tempted and overcame it, who had moments that he could have used his power, but he chose to be humble. That's why Christmas matters. Christmas matters because Jesus came not to be worshipped as a baby, but to be worshipped as a king. Christmas matters because Jesus shows us, you can worship me as a king because I've done and gone through life like you have. I've died and I conquered death, so you can live. Christmas matters. Christmas matters, but Christmas is not the end of the story. It's just the opening chapter. And Mark he writes his book, and everything is so fast. It feels like Mark finished suddenly. It's like if you're reading it, it's like he gives you some details, but at the same way that so much happened in the first chapter, so much happened in the last chapter, and you feel like, Mark, let me take a breath in and let me slow down, and it's over. And a lot of scholars will believe that Mark did that on purpose. He was intentional on how he finished his gospel. Because he starts with, in the beginning of the good news, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus, the Son of God. And he doesn't finish the end of the gospel of Jesus, the Son of God. He doesn't end like that. And most scholars will believe that Mark left it unfinished because he's inviting us to step into the story. It didn't finish there. He's inviting us. It's your turn now. Jesus conquered death. You can live. So you can have a new beginning and you can step in. The story that God is writing through humanity has not finished with the cross, has not finished with the first church, has not finished with the apostles. It still needs to be lived through me and you. So Mark doesn't finish his book completely. He doesn't put an end completely. He leaves you wanting to take a breath and say, okay, it's my turn now. It's our turn now. Christmas is your beginning. It can be your beginning. The Jesus who came in a manger, died on the cross, and rose from the grave is still giving new beginnings to us today. He's giving beginnings to some of us that have been a Christian for our whole lives. But he also wants to give new beginnings to people that have never even said yes to him. You see, Christmas is our beginning, is the beginning. In Easter, we received a new life. It's there when Jesus' story becomes our story. You see, when you're telling the story of the nativity, maybe to your kids, to your grandchildren, to anyone else that you're telling the story, you can say, that's my story too. I'm part of that. We are part of that. It doesn't end there. And I feel sometimes we are so good at telling a beautiful story to our kids, but we're not inviting our kids to step in. That's the beginning. It's our time. It's our turn now. God came incarnated in flesh, humbled himself. It's not just another beautiful story. It's an invitation for us to step in. You see, the doorway